Thank you. Wow. Oh, what a perfect evening. Thank you, Representative Eisenhart, for your leadership. Thank you, Steve, and everybody who is organizing Democrats in this area and across the state. Thanks to all of you for agreeing to spend an evening talking about where the future of our country is going. And thanks for making me feel right at home, too. You know, Dubuque has a reputation among mayors and is a great example of how cities and towns are leading the way when sometimes Washington can't get its act together. I just want you to know that the environmental work and the climate action that's been done in this city is something that's been noticed around the country, and you ought to be proud of it. I come from a Midwestern city too. Which way is east? I'm about 5 hours that way on I-80. A river city. And a city that taught me that what is most important about politics is not the political game, it's not who looks good on TV, it's not who sounded good in a committee meeting or got off the best zinger in a debate. It's about the fact that political decisions affect our everyday lives. They affect our communities, they affect our families, they affect our paychecks, our marriages. This is why we have government and politics, is to try to make those things better. And yet, right now, we send politicians to Washington hoping they're going to fight for us. And when they get there, it feels like they're more interested in the part about fighting than they are in the part about us. And that's what's got to change. I grew up in a city that wore the imprint of decisions that left Middle America behind. I didn't even know it was unusual as a kid growing up, looking out the window of my dad's Chevy on the way to school. I didn't know it was unusual to pass by empty factories and broken down houses until I went away to go to school. But I learned firsthand what happens to a city when we don't have the right kind of leadership nationally. I saw in my own life the good and bad that politics can do. There are people in my family who were saved by Obamacare. And we're thankful for what that made possible. But also people I care about who were lost to the opioid crisis. The course of my own life was changed by the orders that sent me to a foreign war. And on the other hand, best thing in my life, my marriage, exists by the grace of a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. And Iowa had a little bit to do with bringing us marriage equality, and we're thankful for that too. So I think we live in a moment where we've got to reorient our government and our politics around what actually matters most, and that's our everyday lives. Which is hard to do because of the unbelievable noise coming out of Washington. But what I'm making the case for is that the crisis that's upon us right now is even bigger than the crisis that this president represents. Now, don't get me wrong. This president amounts to a national emergency. We know that. We can't go on like this. We can't have 4 more years of this. We can't have a president admit on national television to trying to involve a foreign government in impacting the American election and accept that as normal. But I also don't think it's normal for somebody like that to have been able to take over one of our major American political parties in the first place. To put it another way, if everything was going along just fine in this country, it would not have been possible for somebody like him to get within cheating distance of the Oval Office to begin with. So let's get to the root of the issue. Let's figure out the cause that this current moment is a symptom of. And when we do, I think we'll realize that this crisis has been brewing for a long time. We've got an economy where the Dow Jones can go up and life expectancy is going down at the same time. That shouldn't even be possible. We've watched as climate change went from a theory to an observation, from a prediction to a reality, and now to an emergency, and we're still having the very same debates over not just how, but whether to do anything about it. We see the crisis of gun violence in our schools, and yet the debate has not changed very much since the days when I was in high school. When I came home one day from junior year in high school and turned on the TV and saw the Columbine shooting. We have produced a second school shooting generation. Shame on us if we allow there to be a third. So what we're going to have to do is come up with ideas that are going to be bold enough to meet the moment, not just repeat ourselves or recycle the same arguments that we've had, but actually get something done. And while we're at it, we got to unify an American people that is dangerously, frighteningly divided and polarized and discouraged. Now, the argument that I'm here to make is that it is not only possible, it is necessary to do both. In other words, don't listen to those who say that we can't be bold at a time like this. Because the reality is, the other side's going to say the same thing about us no matter what we do. We have got to come up with solutions that are bold enough to meet the moment. But also, don't listen to anybody who says that we've got, in the name of being bold, to turn off half the American people and tell them they don't belong and bring in ideas that say my way or the highway that shut out our fellow Americans before we even get to Election Day. Because a good idea, a bold idea, should also have the capacity to unify the American people, especially with a good president. And that's the kind of president that I seek to be. Now, of course, before anyone gets to be president, first you got to actually win the election. And I know that a lot of voters who come to events like this and see people like me are really asking the question, who's going to be able to win? As one person very bluntly put it to me in New Hampshire, he said, "You seem great, but I would vote for my neighbor's dog if I thought that's who could beat Donald Trump." And I think a lot of folks feel that. So let me just very briefly talk about why I'm the best candidate to defeat this president. First of all, the usual attacks aren't going to work on me. They're going to rant about socialism no matter what, but I cut my teeth in the private sector, and part of how South Bend came back was I knew how to engage the private sector and make sure that we could be pro-worker and pro-growth at the same time. So we're going to put that argument to bed. They'll try to talk about Washington, but the beauty is I don't work in Washington. I'm not from Washington. I'm from right here in the Midwest. A mayor solving problems, getting things done, and insisting that we be well served and we get Washington to look a little more like our best run cities instead of the other way around. And then they'll do that other thing they do sometimes where this president sometimes literally will hug the flag and throw a military parade for himself. And let me tell you, if they want to debate national security, I can't wait, because I've seen worse incoming than a misspelled tweet. But the other thing we got to do in order to win is we got to deserve to win. And that means no matter how much crazy nonsense is coming out of this White House, as soon as we're done calling it out, as soon as we put it in its place, we've got to get back to talking about what's impacting our lives. Because the more we talk about him, the less we're talking about you. And we've got to deny him the power to change the subject. So let's talk about what it actually means in our lives when we have a president who governs according to our values, who looks for those bold ideas that can also bring us together. What does that actually mean in practice? Well, let's think about it in terms of the values that ought to hold us together as Americans, like love of our country. We really love our country. That means we love the freedoms that this country is built on. That means that patriotism implies an obligation to speak up about our values, and when somebody does, even when they criticize, or especially when they criticize the president, they deserve better than to be told to go back to where they came from. I'm talking about a different kind of love of country, one that actually keeps us safe from the threats that are mounting all around us, the 21st century threats like cybersecurity and election security that aren't going to respond to a 17th century solution like putting up a wall. I'm talking about keeping Americans safe from gun violence, which means summoning the courage not to allow the Second Amendment to be twisted into an excuse to do nothing and allow our schools and malls and churches to become battlefields. I'm talking about protecting America from white nationalist violence before it takes one more life in this country. And yes, I'm talking about treating climate change like the security issue that it is and showing global leadership in how to do it. That's part of what it means to love this country and care about her future and take care of each other. Governing in accordance with American values like freedom means recognizing that there's more to freedom than cutting a regulation somewhere. Freedom means more than Amazon's freedom to not have to pay any federal taxes on multi-billion-dollar profits. Real freedom means making sure we can live well, the freedom to live a life of our choosing. And sometimes that does mean getting government out of the way. In this respect, I agree, at least philosophically, with those who think that in some cases, government needs to get out of the way. For example, government needs to get out of the way of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be and what they can do with their bodies. But there are other times when our freedom depends on making sure that the right kind of government steps up. Like seeing to it that we have clean air and clean water instead of rolling back the regulations that keep us safe. Or making sure that every single American has health care because health care is a right. Now, in the spirit of unifying the American people through the value of freedom, the way I would do it is Medicare for all who want it. In other words, we take a version of Medicare, we make it available, everybody can get in on it, if and when you want. It's very similar to the other plans, except I don't believe in Medicare for all whether you want it or not. I'm so confident that our plan will be the best one that I think everybody will come to it, but I don't find it necessary to command you to do so. If you do like that private plan, stick with it. It's just that I think ours is going to be better. Honoring American freedom means supporting workers' freedom to organize for good days' pay, for good days' work, and for better working conditions. And in the future, that means making sure that new kinds of workers in a new economy get that chance too, which is why I stand with gig workers who've been trying to organize. Because if you're doing work, that makes you a worker. And just because they call it a gig doesn't mean it isn't a job. You deserve protections, whether you're in a traditional job or something in the new economy. And when I'm president, you will see a president who stands up for people of any religion and of no religion equally, rather than allowing faith to be used to tell anybody they don't belong. We're never going to impose one person's interpretation of their own faith on anybody else. What we will do is invite those who are guided by religious principles to think about what that might mean. Because at a time like this, when we see food being cut out of the budget for hungry children, when we see mothers being torn apart from their kids at the border, I think it's fair to ask exactly what kind of scripture would condone that. Whatever happened to I was hungry and you fed me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Faith, and I mean any faith I've ever heard of, teaches us to seek out leaders who walk in the way of humility and decency. And so I don't think Christian faith or any faith requires that we condone, let alone support, what's going on in the White House right now. But that's just me. So you can expect a different kind of presidency from me. You can expect the kind of presidency where when you turn on the news and the subject of the White House comes up, your blood pressure actually goes down a little bit instead of going up. It's another thing I want to do for public health. And you can expect personnel choices that reflect that. From appointing judges and justices who respect the kind of American freedom I'm talking about, to appointing a head of environmental protection who believes in protecting the environment, and how about a Secretary of Education who believes in public education? Seems like it's about time. Do you have any teachers in the house? Think about how much better this country would be if we treated our teachers, honored our teachers, a little more like soldiers and maybe paid them just a little more like doctors, out of regard for the work that they're doing. That's the kind of president you can expect me to be. And we will deliver on the big challenges of our time. We will deliver climate solutions that invite all Americans, including, perhaps especially, rural America, to be part of the solution, because this only happens if all of us are in on it. You can expect us to match the ambition and resources that went into the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II with the Frederick Douglass Plan right here in America to tackle systemic racism before it pulls down the American project any further. And you can expect a president who insists that mental health care be as easy and affordable to get as physical health care in this country. We are breaking the silence about mental health care in addiction when I'm president. That's what I'm seeking to deliver. And I'm motivated to do it, above all, by people who come to my events and ask questions who aren't even old enough to vote. I'm thinking about the 12-year-old in Orlando who asked what we were going to do about health insurance. And I thought, that's pretty cool. 12-year-old is enough of a policy buff that she wants to ask about health insurance policy. Then she explained why she was asking. And the reason she was asking is because she has juvenile diabetes, and she is worried about what will happen to her if her parents ever lost their insurance. She's 12. That's what she's worried about. Or a 13-year-old who comes to an event and asks with tears streaming down his face what we're going to do to keep his school safe. And his mother lets me know that they live not that far from Sandy Hook, and I do the math and think about how old he would have been then. And of course we got policy answers on this, but the only real answer we have for a child looking us in the eye and asking what we're doing to keep them safe or to make sure they have a good future is we're supposed to worry about that so you don't have to. We're supposed to fix that so you can focus on being a kid. And as hard as it is sometimes to look kids in the eye and explain to them what's going on in our country right now, we can be proud of what we're about to do. I'm picturing the day 10 years from now when I run into those same kids and they're 23, 22, and getting ready to go into the working world. And we talk about what we did in 2020. And I say to them, I'm sorry it got to the point that it did. But look at what we did. I'm sorry we allowed the economy to get so out of whack that half the country didn't see their income budge. But I'm so proud that in 2020 we acted to make sure that the economy really does lift all boats. Tell them I'm sorry we ever allowed it to get to where you were afraid of going to school, but then we finally summoned the courage to do something to get weapons of war off the streets and to make sure that we kept weapons for those who didn't need to have them. We'd be proud of what we did. We'd be proud to tell them about the steps we took in 2020 to see it to it that in this country, your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth, your life expectancy, or your relationship with law enforcement. We'd be proud of that. And proud of doing what it takes to create a sense of belonging for everybody in this country. Because we have a crisis of belonging. People, for a million different reasons and a million different ways, are being told they don't fit. And I think that's contributed to everything from our political problems to the increase in addiction and deaths from despair because people are medicating themselves to deal with this issue. And presidential leadership could make all the difference. We got to let people know that they belong. One of the most hopeful things that happened to me on this campaign was here in Iowa. I was in Muscatine, and a girl came up to me and said, at the end of an event, she said, "Your campaign makes me feel like it's okay for me to be myself." And it's a really heartening thing to say. But especially because I thought I understood what she was trying to tell me, and I actually didn't. She said, "Your campaign makes me feel like I can go to school and talk about my beliefs, that I can be myself, and I don't have to be ashamed because I have autism." And I thought, now we're really getting somewhere. Because I don't know exactly how our campaign touched her or reached her, but what I've learned is that before the first vote is even cast, we have a chance to let people know that they belong. We have a chance to empower one another and lift one another up in making this country a better place. This will only work, and by this I mean America, will only work if we have a place for everybody. Creating that sense of belonging is what the presidency is for, and it is why I want to be your president. Now, I don't want this to just be a monologue, so I'm looking forward to having a discussion on some of the questions that you all have offered up. We gathered them in writing. I want you to welcome to the stage one of our fantastic organizers, Vanessa, who is going to be your voice, and we're going to take some of these questions. Hello.
Hello, Dubuque. Hello there, people.
Aren't our organizers the best? You got to know them.
What are your plans for gun control? From Miss Kathy.
All right, just get here. Give a quick holler so I can see you. There you are. I see you. So here's what I think we got to do. We need universal background checks. We need red flag laws to disarm domestic abusers and identify people who are in extreme risk. We need to actually fund research on gun violence as a public health issue. There's no good reason to have cut that funding. And yes, we need to act on high-capacity magazines and ban the sale of assault weapons in this country. I trained on these kinds of weapons. I carried one of these weapons in a war zone, and I don't believe they have any place in our country. But there's something else we got to think about, which is how is it that on something like background checks, 90% of Americans are on the same page? 90% of Americans want us to do, including gun owners, including Republicans, and that huge majority of the American people hasn't turned into a majority in the American Congress. That shows you that our democracy needs fixing. That is money in politics, that is the way our districts are drawn, that is the filibuster, and in the long run, things like a national popular vote, because the democracy is not reflecting the will of the American people.
From Mary Jane, do you have any plans to address mental health issues in our schools?
Indeed. Mary Jane, you here? Hello. So, one of the things that strikes me whenever I'm talking to teachers is how much teachers are winding up on the front line of mental health. When we haven't offered teachers the kind of training or the kind of support, I'm proposing that we create mental health first aid for teachers and law enforcement officers, but that's not enough. Because there also has to be a place to refer kids to when there's an issue. It is unacceptable that for far too many people, the primary resource for addiction and mental health services is the county jail. And far too much is being placed on teachers and counselors. Any counselors in the house? There's got to be at least a couple. There we go. Thank you for what you do, too. And other professionals in the school building who are being asked to take on so much, from test administration to scheduling to just the ratio of kids that you got to serve. What we need is to have school psychological resources, trained psychologists, the same way we have a school nurse and at the same levels. And we need to fund communities in developing their plans for both healing and belonging. Belonging to deal with that crisis that I was talking about, because often making sure kids get connected up to the right social opportunities is a huge part of preventive mental health care, but also care to make sure that when there's an issue that needs clinical treatment, that is dealt with quickly. So I am proposing that the federal government, instead of trying to figure it out all in Washington, fund community health plans to deal with mental health. And there's one more thing we got to do. We just got to break the silence about this issue. How many folks here would say someone in your workplace or your family has been affected by a mental health or an addiction challenge? That's just about everybody. So we got to stop talking about this like it's just something affecting a few people. We got to get to the point where it is as routine to talk about a mental health challenge as it is to talk about getting a knee surgery. And we got to make sure that the insurance companies treat mental health on parity, not just on the books, but actually enforce a requirement that they do so.
From Ann. Why do you want to be president?
Deeper question. All right. Is Ann here? Ann would prefer to remain anonymous. So this isn't about me having a deep desire to have the office. If I thought that somebody who had the vision that I'm putting forward were in the field, I would just follow them and support their candidacy. Now, I'm in a field of remarkable people, and I'm proud to be part of the most diverse field in the history of the American presidential campaign. But my decision to run for this office is the same as every time I've decided to run for office, and every time I've decided not to run for an office. It's taking a look at what the office calls for, taking a look at what you bring to the table, and seeing if there's a match. And I believe that there is. I believe that we need a new generation of leadership to step forward. I believe that we need leadership that can have bold and unifying ideas at the same time. I believe it's time for a voice from the middle of the country that everybody keeps writing their articles about. And I believe the American people are looking for pretty much the opposite of the current president. And I would argue that it doesn't get much more different from the current president than a guy like me.
From Shannon H. What is the biggest thing you've learned while on the campaign trail?
Great question. Shannon H, you here? Oh, wow, you're right here. Hi. One of the biggest things I've learned is just how personal politics is. I talked about how I take politics personally because how it's affected my life, but the folks I'm meeting on the trail are sharing stories about how the things that are talked about, like political football on TV, actually, bless you, actually affect their lives. And that's everything from a guy I met not long ago in New Hampshire who was talking about being in the line at the pharmacy. The lady in front of him was $5 short to be able to pay her prescription. And he reached into his pocket and found $5, but he said, I don't know what's going to happen next time. And it was a reminder that our country is made up of the kind of people who would find $5 to help somebody in a pinch, but also our country is the kind of place that shouldn't have to. And when I meet a farmer earlier today who's just frustrated that he's still got last year's beans in storage and feels like this president is just asking him to take one for the team as part of some China strategy that doesn't make any sense. It takes these things off of the cable airwaves and into our lives and our communities. And even though I understood in theory that that's what we would see, it's different when you're actually talking to folks. So I've learned a lot about that. I've also learned that folks are looking at the big picture. And when I talk to people in a place like Iowa, I'm encountering voters who are very much aware of the influence that you have, aware that it means something, that you have your thumb on the scale of the American presidency and the impact that you can make. And with all the seriousness of a vetting committee, are kicking the tires on all of our plans and looking us over and poking holes and seeing if there's any weaknesses in the arguments we're making, because folks really do take that as a duty. And I'm glad, because the stakes couldn't be higher than where we are right now. And the last thing I'm learning is that maybe people aren't as tribal as you would think. We're being described as if we're just irreconcilably different, or as if America is divided into good people and bad people. Where what I believe is that we're all capable of very good and very bad things. And what matters in leadership is whether it's speaking to what is best in us or what is worst in us. And I've seen folks from across the spectrum. I've seen a lot of Republicans come to events and say they're going to vote for me. And part of me is thinking, did you see the speech? Because I'm pretty strong in what I believe in. But
But it's not about ideology for everybody. Some folks are just looking for the right kind of leader and know that right now we've got a president who's betraying his party's values, not just ours, and are ready for a change.
And that gives me a great deal of hope as we go on the trail.
What is your #1 policy for climate change from Emma C?
All right, Emma? Hi, Emma. Hard to pick just one, but the #1 policy idea is that, and I'll tell you a couple specific things, but the overarching policy idea is this has to be a national project. First of all, America always does better when we have a national project. Going to the moon, getting through the Great Depression, winning a war, whatever it is, a national mobilization that brings out the best of us. The reason that's so important is the climate is too serious, too imminent, too existential for us to go on with it being treated as if it's a partisan issue. We just can't wait. That's why it's so important, I think, for example, to recruit industrial workers who need to be shown a way to succeed and thrive, and make sure that when we're doing, for example, the climate core that I propose to be part of our national service plan, that includes weatherizing houses, we're also partnering with organized labor to create pathways into the building trades. Or that we're creating an on-ramp into new clean technology industries for folks who might be displaced from industries that are going to be shrinking. This has to be all of us, and especially farmers. We got to invite farmers, but not just pressure farmers or browbeat farmers, but pay farmers for sustainable techniques that would pencil out until we invite them to bring them to scale. I mean, if we can find billions of dollars to bail out farmers from the damage done by the trade war, then surely we can find resources to invest in things like the Conservation Stewardship Program that incentivizes farming to help lead the way on farming. So that's the big idea. The #1 idea is that all of us need to be in on it, that we all have to take, and then we'll stand taller, we'll be proud of it. I want the main emotion we feel when we think about the climate crisis to be pride instead of guilt. But that means we're all working and we're seeing the momentum on that. We've got to show global leadership on that. In other words, the opposite of what we're seeing at the UN right now, because American leadership is necessary for this to work around the world. And then all kinds of, if you want to get into the guts of our policy, definitely invite you to check it out online. But those are the themes that I think are so important. The specific ideas on everything from rural America to investing in research and development for energy storage and renewable energy to what we need to do about our carbon price and dividend.
From Dick S. What is your position on dealing with the China tariff issues?
You here? Say. We talked about this a little bit. There's definitely more to say. There you are. Dick, you just look like a bright light to me. The question, somebody asked about questions about the China tariffs and how we're going to deal with it. So, first of all, you need a plan. When you're dealing with China, you're dealing with a country that often makes its decisions on 10 or 20 or 30-year time horizons. You know, when I got into the race, the president got a little sarcastic, and he said, Mayor Pete, I'd like to see him making a deal with Xi Jinping. I think it's really funny, because I'd like to see President Trump make a deal with Xi Jinping. They keep saying there's going to be a deal, and we haven't gotten one. And I think it's because there hasn't been a strategy. There's been an approach, and the approach has been to poke them in the eye and see what happens. And of course, what happens is they poke back. And that's hurting our pork farmers, that's hurting our soybean farmers, that's hurting so many people in agriculture in this country, and especially in this part of the country. And it's also hurting consumers. Prices on things we buy every day are going up, and they're going to go up even more around Christmas. And we have nothing to show for it. Now, the way I would deal with this is to recognize the fact that China will not change their fundamental economic model because of some tariffs that we slap on them, but that we do need to face the China challenge by increasing our competitiveness. Part of that's investing right here at home. Remember, China is investing trillions of dollars in infrastructure in other countries just to make sure that they owe China something. And we haven't even managed to bring that level of investment federally to our own communities. We got to make sure we're more competitive at home. That's #1. #2 is we've got to engage the world and not allow China to swoop in where American leadership has been missing. And lastly, we got to stand up for American values. When people in Hong Kong are standing up for democracy, when Uyghur Muslims are being persecuted because of their faith, we got to stand up for American values and at least speak to their aspirations and let them know that they have moral support from the United States. All of that needs to happen in our relationship with China.
What are your plans for closing gender and pay gaps? From Morgan M.
Super important. Morgan here? Hi, Morgan. Thanks for coming. So, it's just unacceptable in 2019 there remains a gender pay gap. That women are making far less than men for the same work. And if it's women of color, it's even less. Equal pay day comes even later in the year when it comes to black women and Latino women. And one thing that'll make a big difference is a Paycheck Fairness Act that requires employers to abandon discriminatory practices or relying too much on salary history, which is one of the ways that something that's been going on for far too long perpetuates itself into the future. That's one thing. Another thing is, it's amazing what transparency can do. So we're going to require every large employer to publish their pay data and publish what their salary gap is. And then we'll see whether that doesn't motivate them to step up and shape up real quick. Because then we can make choices about where we buy. And the third thing is, it is vitally important to me that in the appointees that I place, whether it's on the bench or in the cabinet or anywhere in senior positions in government, that we have gender equity. Not just because it's the right thing to do for women, but because we make better decisions. Companies and countries make better decisions when the top leadership team has gender balance, and I think that would lead to pay equity as well.
Is our country full, or do we need more immigrants? From Glenn Allen.
All right, great question. Glenn, can I see it? All right, I believe you. I just can't see you. Oh, there you are. Hi. So, the president says our country's full. So South Bend, Indiana, where I live, we lost 30,000 people after the factories closed. We're growing, but we're growing just a little bit. If you took out immigration, we wouldn't be growing at all. So we're already thankful for what immigration is doing. That's a big part of how our city grew in the first place 100 years ago. Now, the way I see it as a mayor, if we were built for 30,000 more people than we have today, that means I got enough lane miles of road and pipes of sewer to maintain and roads to plow for 30,000 more people than we've got. And I could use 30,000 more taxpayers to help us manage the cost of it. So you say immigrant, I say taxpayer, and South Bend is most certainly not full. Now, if we zoom out a little bit to what's going on in rural America, in order to keep schools open, in order to support our hospitals, in order to make sure that parts of the economy that are hurting for workers, not hurting for jobs, are able to grow, including, of course, in the agricultural sector, but not only in ag. We need people. It's one thing to have a job growth strategy. It's another thing to make sure that your job growth strategy is matched with a population growth strategy. And so my plan for lifting up rural economies includes a community renewal visa, so that communities that want to can apply for an allotment of fast tracks to the green card for people who commit to living and working in those communities for a certain amount of time, because they'll grow. And as I have seen in communities right here in Iowa, from Storm Lake to Elkader, communities that embrace the potential of immigration, help them grow, even in conservative areas, see the benefit of it, and are a lot more open on immigration than the communities around America that haven't seen any. And so we've got to recognize the potential of immigration to be a solution, even while we're working to make sure that on the border we deal with the problem that was created in Washington, a problem that can be solved by managing the border in a way that's consistent with our values as well as our laws, putting an end to family separation, ensuring asylum cases get heard, and reforming the overall system before anyone else gets caught up in it.
How will you bring together your fellow politicians and the country?
Good question. Are you here, by the way? Or ask the question? All right. Well, I know it's a question on a lot of folks' minds. Oh, hi. Thanks for coming.
This is what a president ought to be doing. This is what a mayor is doing. I'm on my third Republican governor, and I've figured out ways to work with each of them for the benefit of our community and the state. Mayors can't afford to think about divisions all the time because we just got to get stuff done. And we have got to find ways to work with people who have somewhat different values or identities than we do. Now, the problem is there's not a lot of good faith right now in Congress. When, for example, Mitch McConnell says that he would never have held a vote in 2016 on a nominee, because you can't do that in an election year. But in 2020, if it happened, he would. It means he's not pretending to be working in good faith. And that creates a real problem, because then you can't even begin to get the bipartisan work on areas of common interest that are so important to cooperation. So I will look for that number, however few there are some, I think, who have that good faith and work to build on that. For the others, I think the only thing that will really work to reunite them with their consciences is if remaining on board with this presidency results in them losing power. And that's something all of us can do something about in the election. And then might help folks find their way to the table a little more readily.
Mayor Pete, we have time for one more question. Just one more. And that is, please address the national debt. Trillion deficits each year. 23 trillion to date will leave your generation bankrupt. From Sparky.
All right, from who?
Sparky.
Sparky. Are you Sparky? Huh? At the bar, I see. Hi, Sparky. I'm glad you asked that question. Because I am more concerned about the debt and about deficits than is probably fashionable in the Democratic Party. We haven't been in the habit of talking about this issue. But what we've seen is when the other side takes power, deficits go through the roof, especially right now. They talked about deficits a lot, especially when they were trying to stop us from growing investments in infrastructure and health and that sort of thing. But when they actually took power, it turns out they don't care. And what that means is if we don't start really acting on this in the Democratic Party, then no one will. Now, there are times when it is appropriate to spend some deficit spending as an investment if you know it's going to pay back. For example, early childhood investments pay back. Investing in infrastructure pays back. Investing in our health pays back. Education, for sure. But one thing you'll see me do, and that not all of my competitors seem to be willing to do, is I will explain how we will pay for every promise that I make. It's the right thing to do. It's why I'm being a little careful about some of the promises that I do make. It's why when it comes to making sure that we make college affordable, I don't make exactly the same promises some of the others do, but I still find a way to make sure that cost is no barrier for low and middle income students. It's why I put together a solution to get everybody health care, but is a few $1 trillion less than some of the others. But it's also got to include the willingness to raise revenue, because we really do need to do more. Ever since the 1980 or so, basically you start the clock right around the time I was born, and you see the disinvestment in our schools and our infrastructure and our health in order to pay for these giant tax cuts that a lot of people didn't even need. And the consequence is that we have a degraded infrastructure, and we've just accepted that, when other countries don't. So we have to be willing to raise revenue. And I would begin with multi-billion-dollar profit corporations that haven't paid a penny in income tax. And the wealthiest among us who can afford to do a little more. Don't worry, they'll still be very, very wealthy after I'm president. But we're going to ask more of them, because they are among those who have benefited the most from being part of this country. And if we are honest about it, then we can add this all up. It's like Social Security. There is no requirement to cut benefits if we're willing to raise the cap or adjust the cap on revenue. And keep Social Security just fine, at least until I'm collected. See, all these issues are personal for me because these financial time bombs they're setting are going to go off in my lifetime. And so this is a matter of generational fairness, just like gun safety or climate change. And all the more reason that you will see my campaign explain how we're going to pay for every single thing that I propose. Thanks one more time, Vanessa, for your fantastic work and for being the voice of our audience tonight. And thanks to all of you for being part of this, because this is where the rubber meets the road. The whole world is going to be watching the decisions that are being made in Iowa just 133 or so days from right now. And I am so hopeful for what we can do. I know it's a bleak time, a divided time, a complicated and challenging time. But for the reasons I shared, I believe that we can be proud of what we do in 2020. Remember that running for office is an act of hope. You only do it unless you think it's going to do some good. And taking time to grill somebody running for office is also an act of hope. Because you're only here because you think it matters. And so my simple question to you is, can I look to you to spread the spirit of hope that is required to bring about political change in this country? And when it comes to the reality show that this president got us trapped in, are you ready to pick up the remote and change the channel to something better? And can I look to you to spread the word about what it is we're trying to achieve? Well, I believe that with your help, Iowa is going to make me the next president of the United States. Thank you for your support. Thank you for taking time here. We will see each other early and often. I'll be with you on the trail every step of the way. Thank you. Thank you and good night. Thank you.